All right, today we're going to talk about something that's a huge part of life, a really fundamental transformation, female puberty. It's this completely natural journey, that takes you from being a kid to becoming an adult. So let's dive right in and break down what's really going on.
So, here's what we've got lined up. First, we'll cover the basics. What even is puberty? Then we'll get into the body's starting signal, look at a typical timeline of changes, talk about what happens when that timeline looks a little different, and wrap up with the big takeaway on timing.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. What is puberty, really? Not just as a phase we go through, but what's happening on a biological level. Let's get right to the core of it. So at its simplest, puberty is just the body's way of shifting from childhood into adulthood. It's the process where our bodies get ready for sexual maturity, to the point where reproduction becomes possible. And the engine driving this whole incredible transformation, it's all about hormones. They're the real MVPs here.
Which, of course, brings up a pretty big question, right? If hormones are the engine, what or who turns the key to get the whole thing started?
Well, the answer is what we call the body's starting signal. And it's not something you can see on the outside, at least not at first. It all kicks off with this quiet, totally invisible chain reaction happening deep inside the body, something called the hormonal cascade.
Okay, this is where it gets super interesting. Think of it like a chain of command. It all begins up in the brain, in a tiny little spot called the hypothalamus. It sends out the first signal, a molecule called GnRH. That message goes to the pituitary gland, which is kind of like the body's mission control. The pituitary gets the message and responds by releasing two other key hormones, LH and FSH. Then, those hormones travel down to the ovaries and basically tell them, all right, it's go time. The ovaries wake up and start producing estrogen. And that estrogen, that's what drives pretty much all the physical changes we think of when we think of puberty.
I love this analogy because it makes so much sense. The brain isn't doing all the hard work itself. Nope, it's the conductor of this whole orchestra. It's just giving the signals, waving the baton. And the hormones, they're the instruments, each one chiming in at just the right moment to create this amazing symphony of change.
So how does this whole hormonal orchestra actually sound? I mean, what are the changes we can actually see? Let's map out a typical timeline of the big milestones. But, and this is really important, think of this more as a general guide, not some strict schedule everyone has to follow.
The key things to notice here are the general order of events, and, just as important, the really wide age ranges. Usually the first sign is breast development, and that can start as early as age 8 for some. After that, you typically see pubic hair, then a major growth spurt, and finally the first menstrual period, which has a technical name, menarche. And just look at how wide those time frames are. We're talking about 5 or even 6-year windows for each of these milestones. It's huge.
And I really can't stress this enough. Every single person's body runs on its own unique biological clock. So your journey is going to be yours alone. Bouncing around inside these age ranges isn't just common. It's totally 100% normal.
Now, what happens when that biological clock seems to be running way ahead of schedule, or maybe a bit behind? That's when we get into what doctors call premature and delayed puberty. So here are the official definitions doctors use. Puberty is considered premature, or the technical term is precocious, if the signs start showing up before age 8. And on the flip side, it's considered delayed if there's no breast development by 13 or if a period hasn't started by 16.
So, why the different timing for different people? Well, it's almost never just one thing. It's usually this really complex mix of factors. Your genetics, for sure, play a massive part. But so do things like nutrition, your body weight, and your overall health. It's this wild combination of nature and nurture all working together to set your body's personal timeline. Okay, we've talked about timelines, hormones, and all these different variations. So what's the one thing you should really walk away with? Let's boil it all down to the most important point.
The most important takeaway? It's that the range of what's normal is just huge. Seriously. There's so much variation, and that diversity is the norm. It's the rule, not the exception. Think of the timeline we showed you as more of a suggestion than a strict rule book.
And look, because everyone's journey is so different, if you ever have any questions or you're just feeling a little worried about your own timing or maybe a friend's, the absolute best thing you can do is just talk to a healthcare provider. A doctor can give you answers that are specific to you and give you some peace of mind.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. Getting the biology down is a great first step, for sure.
But the next step, and maybe the most important one, is asking ourselves, how can we use what we know to have more open, more supportive conversations about these totally natural changes? Thanks so much for tuning in.